Hey, welcome back to the Disney Plus Everyday Challenge, and today we have Adventures in Babysitting. This is the 1987 original film. There's also another one from 2016 on Disney Plus, made by Disney. I'm guessing. I haven't seen that yet. It hasn't come up in the selection randomly. Uh, but yeah, this is one of my all-time favorite movies from the 80s. It stars Elizabeth Shue, who you know from a small part in Back to the Future 2, and Howard the Duck, and oh, okay, she was in more than all that. And I can't believe my brain has erased itself. I have it on VHS. Yeah, it's still the VHS. But yeah, she's just funny and gorgeous and just everything. Between her and Mary Catherine Stewart, I think from Last Starfighter and Night of the Comet, two humongous crushes that I had growing up. That's a lot more information you needed to know or cared to know about me. But yeah, this is a big normal kid adventure in the big city. I want to say normal kid, just a bunch of white kids from suburbia having forced to go into the big scary city of Chicago, and it's an adventure. And it's okay. The premise here is basically Elizabeth Shue's character is don't even remember her name, but I'll find it in here in a second. She is. It opens up with her just singing and dancing. She can't wait to go out on a date with her boyfriend, played by Bradley Cooper, and he's really young in this, but he's still older than her. We find out in the course of this film that she's just too old to be babysitting, and she's just too mature for all this stuff. One of the boys, this one right here, Brad, has a huge crush on her, but she considers him to be a child. By the way, she's 17 and he's 15. I don't want to know how old Bradley Cooper is in this thing, but it's apparently enough to go out to take another girl out to a fancy restaurant. I think I just spoiled something there, but the movie is pretty dang old, so yeah, if you didn't know, now you know. But he cancels on her date, and I just told you why. But he cancels on her date with a lie, and you kind of know he's lying, just the way it is, even from the very start. Because he cancels, she ends up getting offered a job to babysit some kids. Specifically, this little, I think she's like 8 or 9 in this. She's a little girl obsessed with Thor. This is before the MCU ever existed, and this is a girl who gets her Thor kicks from actual Thor comic books. She has a room covered in Kirby art, believe it or not, like posters and stuff based with Kirby-esque art, or actual Kirby art. And she has Thor comic books laying around the house here and there. You can see one in the kitchen at least, and in her room, I think. It doesn't seem important, but it plays into the story later on. But she knows all about Marvel Comics. They live in Chicago, but she just figures that the heroes live in the city. Never mind that it's actually New York, but they live in the city, and Chicago's close enough. She's a kid, so what does she know? So Elizabeth Shue has to babysit her, and her older brother Brad, is there, and yes, she's aware that Brad has a crush on her, but she dismisses him, completely, because he's just so young and 2 years younger than her, and they're both teenagers, whatever. And their buddy Daryl, his buddy Daryl, ends up joining the fun because he's got to show Brad the latest Playboy that has a girl in the centerfold who looks just like Elizabeth Shue. And yeah, and well, the problem is that when everybody settles in at the house and everybody's sort of there, and Elizabeth Shue, pretty much, she's frustrated from not being able to go out on the date with her boyfriend. She just wants a nice quiet night at home, dealing with pretending that the boy in the house doesn't have a crush on her, and the little girl who is just way too energetic about certain things, especially Thor, Hopefully she just chills out and they'll just have a nice quiet night. Well, um, Elizabeth Shue's best friend, Brenda, gives her a call from the bus stop. She's been super depressed, and there's more than a few suicide jokes in this. Um, one is usually too many, but Brenda's decided to run away from home, but she quickly runs out of money and never makes it out of the bus stop. And everything is scary around her. There's a guy who's just standing around in a coat looking at her in the phone booth, by the way. Again, this is 1987. There are no cell phones, at least not for common people. And there's just a dude showing her his gun in his coat and smiling, while an old homeless man screams at her and bangs on the door of the phone booth saying, "You're in my house." Like, so Brenda is freaking out and she's not having a good time. Played by Penelope Ann Miller, I believe. She's great in this. She's just uh, she's silly. It's a small part, but it's still she's the reason why they have to go into the city. So she calls Elizabeth Shue and her name's Chris. By the way, this is directed by Chris Columbus, also, which you'd recognize from I guess Gremlins and a few many Harry Potter. Yeah, did he do like the first two Harry Potters? So yeah, he's he's directed this, but her name is Chris. So yeah, Chris has to go into the town and try to pick up her friend, which should be a really quick trip. It's maybe an hour round trip out of the suburbs into the city real quick and back. Well, she has to take kids with, and then all hell breaks loose. The car breaks down. They lose a tire. There's also, I don't want to ruin. Obviously, I've ruined kind of one of the major plot points, but it's actually minor compared to everything they have to go through. Whether it's car trouble, meeting up with shady characters, getting pulled into just this gauntlet of just danger these sheltered little white kids have to deal with in the big city. And apparently everybody in the big city, except for the mob boss that they run across, has a slightly darker tone of skin than they do, which is just frightening, I guess, to suburban kids. So yeah, it's sort of a weird, I'm sure it wasn't intentional, just metaphor for danger. Now, I understand. I do love this movie. It's hilarious in many ways, but this is definitely Disneyfied. There's two warnings at the beginning of the film. One is it contains tobacco depictions. When I watched it, it actually showed it in a stack of warnings all the way down the left side. I don't know what that was about. But also in the main part of the screen, it says this has been edited for content. And if you know this movie, you know why, because this almost, had they not edited it, it would have been probably the first movie that has the F word in it. And yeah, fool. Well, that's the word they use instead. There's a iconic scene in this, and you can look it up on YouTube if you feel like it, or just scrub right to the 54-minute mark. If you don't feel like watching the movie, and you just want to see some weird overdubs, well, actually, go to a little bit before that, maybe about 51, 52, where they're on the subway, and they run afoul of two gangs that are about to kill each other in a gang fight on a moving subway train, because it's moving into one gang's turf. And so Elizabeth Shue and the kids, Chris and the kids, are all trapped between them, and she is bold enough to stand between them and say, "Stop, we'd like to get off and not be in the middle of this." So the one guy calls her a witch. He doesn't call her a witch. He uses the B word, and so yeah, you can't be calling anybody the B word on Disney Plus. At least on that way. It's just so. The thing is, that word gets used a lot in that scene, back and forth. A bunch of people end up using the word witch back and forth, and it culminates to show a little bit of tension. And then this is a PG-13 film, and by law, you're required to have one F-bomb in a PG-13 movie. And yeah, they chose it correctly. They use it in the right spot, and it can't be used in a way that connotates a sexual act, even though that's what the word is. It needs to be just used as a term to don't mess with the babysitter. Well, in this case, they change it to don't fool with the babysitter. Well, first the gang member says, don't fool with the gang. And she goes, well, don't fool with the babysitter. And it's just hilarious. When I first found out that this movie was finally made available, I think early on this got picked randomly after Disney Plus debuted, and it was part of the lineup, but it showed a thing that said, hey, it's not going to be available until this certain date, and it just became available like a few months ago. And I've been waiting ever since for this to be picked. So, yeah, there's a lot of profanity in this, especially that's beyond acceptable for a Disney Plus show or Disney anything show. So I'm going to be very careful how this. I don't want to use derogatory terms in this thing. I'm not going to be a jerk about it. But, I want to try to keep this for all ages as much as I can. But back in the 80s, we pretty much loved to use words that describe gay people, or just saying the word gay as an insult. Oh, you're just gay. You're a homo. In this case, they use the word homo a few times in an early scene, and instead they change it to weirdo. Well, and it comes back later on, but they make fun of the fact that the little girl loves Thor, and her brother is like, oh, he's a weirdo instead. So they edited that one out. Yes, to some it's fairly a benign thing, but back, these days it's just distasteful to bother to do that. There's other horrible things you can call people. You just don't want to make being gay a derogatory thing. That's just crappy. I was going to say something else, but along those lines, there's a certain point where somebody says a-hole, and they call him airhead instead. There's one where he goes, "You got to be kidding me," and I don't know what he's actually saying. I can probably put in the VHS and find out. I just didn't feel like fast forwarding and rewinding and doing all that. Yes, I have a VCR, and it works beautifully. I checked on which bitch, and then there's also, Don't Fool the Babysitter, which is, again, super iconic. It's at the 54-minute mark, but I'd say start around 50 mark, and then watch the scene. Unless you just pull up the video on YouTube. I think that clip exists out there. This is very much, even though it's PG-13, and it's meant to be like a family film to a certain degree, because it's a big kid-centric adventure. There's like an 8-year-old or a 9-year-old in this movie who worships Thor. Not worships, but I mean, she idolizes him as he's just her hero. Speaking of which, Thor is played by another actor in the Marvel universe who he's played by Vincent D'Onofrio. Very young, very blonde, very buff Vincent D'Onofrio, who has most recently been known for playing the Kingpin on Netflix's Daredevil series. So that's kind of neat. He's played 2 different Marvel characters in 2 different Marvel characters. I can't say the MCU because Netflix is not part of the MCU. I would hope that someday, with all this multiverse crossing over stuff, we might be able to get the Kingpin played by Vincent D'Onofrio back. Could be nice. Daredevil, Jessica Jones, all those. It'd be awesome, but I don't know if that's going to happen. But it's kind of cool. And this is not a Marvel film, of course, but he gets to play what the little girl assumes is Thor. So yeah, it's a fun little sequence just for Marvel fans to, it's a little nod to all things Marvel. She name drops a few other characters like Captain America, Daredevil, Spider-Man, and things like that. But so she's a big comic nerd, which is great. Love it. There's a comic book for everyone. One of the weird things I find about this, there's a lot of music, and one of the most uncomfortable, just cringeworthy scenes in this, which is, it's also funny, but it's really, really silly, is the kids are on the run from these bad guys that are chasing them, and they run into a blues club. And by the way, this movie has so much blues in it. I realize it's the '80s, and I just yeah, it started with the Blues Brothers in 1980. There's still a big blues thing going on, and also the '80s loved the '50s. It's like Back to the Future, as takes place in the 1950s. There's so much music in that era that threw back to that 1950s era, and there was so much music that was very bluesy. But in this movie, they have lots of classic blues songs and some modern performers. One, I'm trying to figure out who he was, um, performing on stage. Again, all the music is mostly blues. There's a Rolling Stones song here, and there's a couple other songs. Any Kiss Me, which is a probably 1950s around Motown song. Maybe it's earlier, I'm not sure. I didn't do the date checking on that, but there's just a crazy amount of blues. Well, when the kids are on the run, they run onto the stage in a blues club, and apparently the band leader, the guy in the guitar, basically they try to escape. They're like, "I'm sorry, we didn't mean to interrupt your little concert." Um, and they're like, "Nobody gets out of here without singing the blues." That's a rule, because there's a whole bunch of people in this room who are just sitting there watching you, and they're not singing the blues. But apparently, when a bunch of suburban white kids show up in a very black neighborhood, they're the test of their mettle is to sing the blues, and they do sing the babysitting blues um, to an enthusiastic crowd. Which at first you'd figure they're gonna just get kicked out of there just for mocking the love of their music, but she tells their story. She tells their story in the blues, and somehow her and the kids are all in sync, and they sing a really good song with the backing band and the band the main singer for the band helping them out along the way. But still, it's one of the just it's a very strange scene. Um, it's like, hey, look, white people, let's co-op. Let's take more of the black man's music, make it their own. So yeah, it's not like Bruce Willis wasn't around to do that already with his harmonica. Anyway, yeah, it's a really fun group. I want to name some of the people here. You might recognize some people. Maya Bruton plays Sarah, the little tiny girl who loves Thor. Keith Coogan plays Brad, and Anthony Rapp plays Daryl, the best friend here, the redhead. Anthony Rapp, some of you might know him. He was in Rent. He was in a bunch of other things, but most recently he's known as Stamets, the doctor, and the guy who hooks into the mycelial network on Star Trek Discovery. Yeah, he's kind of like a jerk. He's very sarcastic. He's got a dry sense of humor, but that's him. He plays a very hetero horn dog in this movie, where he's just has a love for boobies in a very real sense. That is not who he is. He is an actor who is gay in real life, and also his character Stamets is gay on the show. So, yeah, it's the kid grew up to be himself, which is great. So, but it's funny watching him be this hetero horn dog. It's just, I've got Playboys where I'm going to steal Playboys wherever I go. That's pretty much what he did. But yeah, it's if you've never seen it, and I've told you way too much about it, but if you get a chance, just forget my spoilers and watch it. It's a good, fun adventure, and if you're worried about the kids hearing swears, well, they will not, because it's been cleaned up pretty well. But if you want to watch it elsewhere, I'm sure there's Blu-rays out there that are not censored, and also, hey, VHS still exists. That if you want to get it on eBay, those are uncensored. But yeah, also there's a few glimpses at the Playboy every so often. There's no real nudity scene in there, and of course it was edited out in Disney Plus. If I can't remember if it was actually clearly seen in the original, but it's all right. We know what boobies look like. Anyway, let's pick tomorrow's episode. Did it? Dang it. 143. I love you. The sound was off. 143. Oh. Well, I have a feeling this one's about Donald Duck, and it's a short. It's Donald's Dog Laundry. Donald's Dog Laundry. I wonder if Pluto will show up. But hey, we got a short featuring Donald Duck. Donald's Dog Laundry on the Disney Plus Everyday Challenge. I'll see you back here tomorrow with that.